Kathy, are you going to do the welcome?
Sorry, I just did a piece muted. Okay. Amanda, spotlight me. Welcome to our worship service from the Unitarian Society of Northampton and Florence. I'm Kathy Lilly, and I'm your Zoom tech this morning. Amanda Van Linkveld is your co-host. We are very happy to see you here. We strive to be a congregation that welcomes people of all ages, races, religious beliefs, backgrounds, sexual orientations, gender identities, and abilities. We belong to the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and we are guided and inspired by its values and principles. Those values and principles move us to remember that we in Northampton inhabit unceded land of the Pecumtuck and Nipmuc peoples. Our values and principles remind us to acknowledge our responsibility to face all the painful legacies of dispossession and systemic racism that are part of our collective history, even as we affirm and celebrate the legacies that inspire us. We are here to support and celebrate one another and to renew ourselves with hope and gratitude and new resolve. If you are new or returning after a time away, welcome. We're very glad you're here. Please feel free to fill out a virtual visitor card. Doing that allows us to put you on our email contact list. There's a link in the chat to the card. We ask that you remain muted throughout the service and turn off your videos except during the greeting in order to help the technology work as smoothly as possible. We hope that you'll stay for social hour afterwards. It's a great way to engage in meaningful conversations with people you might not otherwise have met. And now we'll begin our service.
Come into this moment, into a circle of hope and compassion, of yearning and wondering. Come into awareness of where and how you are. Come in and know that you are welcome here. And now please join in saying the words to accompany lighting our chalice. We light our chalice to renew our faith in the goodness and beauty of life, to reaffirm the way of open minds and full hearts, and to rekindle the flame of memory and of hope. So Jessica is here this morning, but she's with the junior youth group, so I get to read the story. And Kathy's going to show the slides, and we're going to coordinate this via the satellite. Our story is Where the Wild Things Are, which I'm sure you know very well, by Maurice Sendak. I'm waiting for the slides, Kathy.
Just one moment, some technical difficulties.
Okay, all right. That's okay. Here we go. Where the Wild Things Are, Maurice Sendak. Next. The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind. Next slide. And another kind. Next slide. His mother called him Wild Thing, and Max said to her, "I'll eat you up." So he was sent to bed without eating anything. And we turn the page. Next slide. The very night in Max's room a forest grew. Turn the page. And the forest grew. We turn the page. And grew until his ceiling hung with vines and the walls became the world all around. And we turn the page, and an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max, and he sailed off through the night and the day. We turn the page. Look at the monster. And in and out of weeks and almost over a year to where the wild things are. We turn the page, and when he came to the place where the wild things are, they roared their terrible roars, and they gnashed their terrible teeth, and they rolled their terrible eyes, and they showed their terrible claws. Turn the page. till Max said, "Be still." And he tamed them with a magic trick of staring into all their yellow eyes without blinking once, and they were frightened. And they called him the most wild thing of all. And they made him king of the wild things. And now, cried Max, let the wild rumpus start. And here's the first rumpusing page, and the second rumpusing page, and the third rumpusing page. Next page. Now stop, Max said, and he sent all the wild things off to bed without their supper. And Max, the king of all wild things, was lonely, and he wanted to be where someone loved him best of all. Then all around from far away across the world, he smelled good things to eat. So he gave up being king of where the wild things are. Turn the page. And the wild things cried, "Oh no, please don't go, we'll eat you up, we love you so." And Max said, "No." The wild things roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. But Max stepped into his private boat and waved goodbye. And he sailed back over a year and in and out of weeks and through a day and into the night of his very own room, where he found his supper waiting for him. And it was still hot. And now please join in singing "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah," since I laid my burden down.
Like shouting hallelujah, since I laid my burden down. Feel like shouting hallelujah, since I laid my burden down. Life is sweeter, so much sweeter.
And now it's time for us to greet one another. You're invited to turn on your videos, wave, and say hello in chat. If you're new or newish and would like to, please say hello and tell us where you're from.
Hello, everybody. Great to see you. Andrea, you're still dancing. Andrea Reber is still dancing. That's great. That was a danceable tune. Wonderful to see you all. David MB, great to see you. Mary Ford, great to see you. Fran, John and Sally, and all these people who are hiding, but I'm glad to see your names. Ellen, Debbie, Michael, Scott, Claire, Karen, Justina, and Debbie. Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's staying off the ice and will be able to get out later. And now, you can turn your videos back off, and it is time for us to sing out everyone who is going to RE activities. Go now in peace, go now in peace.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere.
Go now in peace, go now in peace.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
If you were to ask him how old he is, my grandson Caleb would tell you that he's 6. He's now only 3 weeks away from being 6, but he's been making this claim for quite a while. He's been ahead of himself. He's ahead of himself in other ways, too. He's big for his age. He's really big for his age. He's one of just 2 or 3 in his whole kindergarten class who can read. He read me a Frog and Toad story not too long ago, commenting as he read and laughing at the pictures and the jokes. But he gets into trouble at school much, much too often. He refuses to do work that doesn't interest him. He unfortunately fights with other children who thwart his plans. You might call him willful, a bit of a wild thing sometimes. He's not very obedient, which is frustrating for his teachers and also for his parents, and especially for his father, our son Dan, who was a child who loved structure, he liked rules, and he never, ever, ever acted out in school. When our boys were very little, we lived in a split-level house with a playroom on the ground floor and the rest of the rooms where everybody lived upstairs. And when Dan was about 3 and Elliot was 1, I was upstairs in a little room off right next to the stairway at the computer. They were downstairs when almost simultaneously I heard Elliot start to wail, and I saw Daniel marching past me on the hall, down the hall, past the door in front of me, muttering, "I'm going to my room, I'm going to my room." He was punishing himself, meting out his own consequence. And sadly, I abetted him in his love of rules. For many years when the boys were young, we would fly to California once or sometimes twice a year to see my husband Booker's family. And I probably told some of you this before, but Daniel could not have been much older than a year when I told him that there was a rule that there was no crying on the airplane. And he believed me. And he only cried once that I can remember, and that was when we were stuck on a runway in San Francisco for 2 hours because of a snowstorm in Boston. Elliot was more like Caleb, but in a less boisterous way. He didn't get into fights, but he was not big on rules, and he worked very, very hard to avoid doing schoolwork that didn't interest him. I think if he needed to cry on the airplane, he cried, and then he would let someone comfort him, which I'm sure annoyed Daniel. Some of you are in the middle of raising children. Some of you have children who are grown. Some have nieces, nephews. We watch our friends and neighbors raise their children. And most of us, I suspect, find some regret at some of the things that we did or didn't do for or to our children, often when we believe we were doing the right thing, aiming to tame when maybe what was called for was rumpus. Most of us, I suspect, have feelings about things our own parents did or didn't do for or to us. Most of the time, we hope, when they were only doing what they could or believed they were doing the right thing. So I invite you to take a moment now to remember a time when, literally or figuratively, someone kept your supper hot. And now it's time for the pleasure of listening to our offertory music and for considering a weekly donation to the society, as our offering contributions are now shared every week, 50-50, between the society and organizations that serve the community. And as you've been hearing this month, they are now, for the rest of this season, the Movement Voter Project, Hands Up for Haiti, Cathedral in the Night, the First Nations Development Institute COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund, and our good partners, the Pioneer Valley Workers Center. We also encourage donations to support Arita and her family, which you can do either through the Sanctuary Fund or through Arita's GoFundMe page. Thank you. This morning's meditation is a poem called Like Mercy Itself. It's from Rumi. A dragon was pulling a bear into its terrible mouth. A courageous man went and rescued the bear. There are such helpers in the world who rush to save anyone who cries out. Like mercy itself, they run toward the screaming. And they can't be bought off. If you were to ask one of those, why did you come so quickly? He or she or they would say, because I heard your helplessness. Where lowland is, that's where water goes. All medicine wants is pain to cure. And don't just ask for one mercy. Let them flood in. Let the sky open under your feet. Take the cotton out of your ears, the cotton of consolations, so you can hear the sphere music. Give your weakness to one who helps. Let's take a moment together in silence.
Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still you remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
The book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Torah, contains stories that are held in common by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the so-called religions of the book. It is part of the biblical heritage that Unitarian Universalism shares. Its stories are spare but powerful. They allow room for wondering, for interpretation, and for personal connection when we let our imaginations roam a bit. And for me, when we tell and retell the stories, we're reminding ourselves of the ways that we're connected to and part of a larger story that's thousands and thousands of years old. Telling these stories can sometimes evoke the same kinds of feelings that I get in a redwood forest, imagining myself back to the time when that tree was a sapling. And one of the most challenging stories in the book of Genesis, possibly in the whole Bible, is about Abraham and his son Isaac. It's a story that raises questions about loyalty and obedience, about mercy and parental love, about who and what God is, about the nature of power. And it comes from Genesis 22. God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." And Abraham said, "Here I am." And he said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love." Now, if you were here last week and you remember that Ishmael was Abraham's older son and Isaac's half-brother, you're right, you get a star. Here, Isaac is called Abraham's only son because Ishmael and his mother Hagar have, just in the chapter before, been banished. And Abraham's God is now telling him to go off somewhere and kill and burn Isaac as a sacrificial offering to his God. The story goes on. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. Abraham doesn't argue. He just goes off, and when they're close to the designated place, he and Isaac go on alone. The story continues. Isaac said to his father Abram, "Father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." Isaac said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the 2 of them walked on together. And when they came to the place, Abraham built an altar and laid the wood. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abram reached out his hand and took the knife. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." The angel said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God." And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. The angel said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will indeed bless you. I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, as the sand that is on the seashore, because you have obeyed my voice." "But Father, where is the lamb?" That is a heart-wrenching scene. Now, the first question you might be asking is, what kind of a God would give a test like that? Because the promise about making Abraham's offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven or the grains of sand is an old one. What do we make of that story? Here's a modern response by Rabbi Karen Soria. She wrote this: Sarah was dreaming. Something terrible was happening to Isaac. She struggled to stop the dream, to snatch away her son, but the dream slipped out of her grasp as she felt the universe spinning around her and images whirling about her. Altar, wood, firestone, Isaac, wood, firestone, Isaac, Abraham, altar, Isaac, Abraham, knife, firestone, Isaac, Abraham, altar, Isaac, Abraham, knife, firestone, Isaac, Abraham, knife, Isaac, Abraham, ram. The images flashed too quickly for her to separate them. But a ram, she had seen a ram. "Abraham, lift your eyes and see." Abraham lifted the knife. Blinded by a fear and light greater than any she had ever known, Sarah screamed, "Abraham, Abraham!" And Abraham heard the angel of the Lord calling him. Karen Soria really brings that story to a modern human level about relatable human parents, a mother's terrible fear for her child, human blindness and folly, a mother who is one of those helpers in the world who rush to save anyone who cries out, who, like mercy itself, run toward the screaming. What do you suppose happened next in that story? What possible conversation could Isaac and his father have as Abraham loosened his bonds? We don't know. We do know that Isaac doesn't do much of anything in the remaining chapters of that book of the Bible or anywhere else. Isaac apparently spends a lot of time in his mother's tent. Abraham has to dispatch a servant who happens to be the man who would have inherited his wealth if Isaac had not lived, because women did not inherit. He dispatches a servant to find Isaac a wife. That servant goes to Haran and brings back Abraham's niece, Rebekah, who marries Isaac and gives birth to the twins Esau and Jacob. And when Jacob is grown, he sets off to Haran on his own. Jacob is like his grandfather Abraham. He has adventures, he gets around. It's hard for me, reading this story from a 21st century perspective, not to see Isaac's passivity as a result of childhood trauma. Trauma that was caused by a heart-wrenching choice his father was forced to make. Commentators have struggled with this story for millennia, trying to explain it, offering conjectures, how it came to be, the kinds of beliefs and practices that led to its telling, about how it ended up in Holy Scripture. And some scholars argue that it dates back to a time when child sacrifice was common, which it was in primitive cultures, many of them. Some argue that the Isaac story commemorates the end of the practice of child sacrifice in the cult that evolved into Judaism. Others speculated that it was included in the sacred text as a form of protest against the practice. In the Middle Ages, there were Jews who believed that Abraham actually did kill Isaac and that God brought him back to life. They say that this reflects conditions during that time when persecution in Jewish communities was so horrific that it drove some parents to kill their children and then themselves. Some Christian commentators also claim that Abraham actually went through with the deed and then that Isaac was resurrected, and they saw it as prefiguring the death and then resurrection of Jesus. And the story is told during the High Holy Days, the period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And one of the explanations given for the sounding of the shofar, the ram's horn, on Rosh Hashanah, is that it's a reminder of the ram that was substituted for Isaac. So it's a reminder, in that case, of mercy, of God's mercy. Could it also be a story about second chances? Where lowland is, that's where water goes. All medicine wants is pain to cure. Don't just ask for one mercy, let them flood in. Give your weakness to one who helps. Who for you is one who helps? I invite you to join in singing hymn number 93, To Mercy, Pity, Peace, and Love.
Mercy, pity, peace, and love, all
In every moment of our lives, we make choices. Do we rescue the bear? Most of our choices are so routine and mundane we don't even notice we're making them. But some are full of consequences. The story of Abraham and Isaac is a story about a father's choice that's hard to make sense of. On the surface, it's a story about loyalty and obedience. It's a story about someone who inhabits a worldview that puts loyalty and obedience ahead of everything else, including the life of his son. But Abraham believes that everything that has happened to him up to this point is part of the plan that his God has for him. And when I imagine him with compassion, I shudder at the inner turmoil he must have been feeling. The response on the part of many Republican legislators to the evidence of the Capitol insurrection on January 6th is also hard to make sense of. They were there. They could have been injured. They could have been killed if things had gotten just a little bit more out of hand. And they have heard what is, by most credible accounts, compelling evidence that the former President of the United States incited the insurrection. They not only refuse to vote for his impeachment, they continue to actively support him. They make spurious comparisons between the insurrection and Black Lives Matter protests this summer. Why? Is this a story about loyalty and obedience? Do these politicians persist because they believe their destinies are linked to the former presidents? Because they're trapped in a vision or a worldview that they believe in blindly? If I try to imagine them with compassion, I wonder about the inner turmoil. Is there inner turmoil that they may at some level be feeling? In every moment of our lives, we make choices. Most of them are routine and mundane. We don't even notice that we're making choices. And others are full of consequences. I've been listening to a novel that's called The Midnight Library. Actually, I finished it this weekend. The main character, Nora, is estranged from her brother, who is her only living relative. Her cat dies. The next day, she's fired from her job, and so she's depressed and despondent and decides to commit suicide. She swallows pills and then finds herself in a library filled with an infinite number of books, all of which represent lives that would have been hers had she made different choices. She's given the opportunity to enter and explore some of those alternative lives. It kind of justifies itself based on what my son Elliot would probably call pseudo-quantum physics. But I found it entertaining and somewhat intriguing. And Nora discovers, among other things, that the choices she regrets not making in what they call her root life, choices that she does make in alternative lives, lead to surprises and challenges and disappointments. She learns that her choices have made a difference not just for her, but for other people. In one life, her long-dead father is still alive. In another life, she's working with her brother. In another life, her brother is dead. In one life, she's nearly eaten by a polar bear. I'm not sure what impact her escape had on the polar bear, so thinking compassionately about the bear, I hope he found something else to eat. In every moment of our life, we make choices, and most of them are not as heart-wrenching as Abraham's choice of whether or not to raise the knife. But sometimes our choices are hard, and most of them are not reversible. Once we've done something, we can't rewind the clock and undo it. Many of us are in the program we've called Learning to Lead in Love dialogue work, And the premise behind that is that people's minds and hearts are changed when they're treated with respect and compassion, when we approach them with an intention to hear their stories and hope that they will then want to hear our own. The Midnight Library book had the same conclusion I had already come to. We'll never know for certain what effect, what millions or trillions of effects our choices have on others. But our choices do matter. It matters, and we do our small bit to make the world a better place when we show compassion and when we're kind. My colleague and friend Derek Jackson offered this in a recent email that he sent to our Ministers Association. He said, "Remind us of our stories, our lives, our volumes in this great anthology of the world, each one valuable, each one a blessing." So may it be. And now please join in singing another one we can dance to, "Love Will Guide Us."
Love will guide us, Jesus tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, Jesus tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night.
We can give from deep within us. We can change the world with our kindness and with our love. Go in peace.
Thank you for joining our service today. If you're going out into this beautiful